Hello everyone and welcome to this newest episode of Blitzkrieg. This is Remleiz from 40k Theories.
And this is Fiaura from my own channel, Fiaura the Tank Girl. It's too early in the morning for me. Anyway, we're going to talk about Tau, aren't we?
Yes we are. This is what you all voted for to do. And there are some difficulties in doing some of the research for this, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I'd say so. The Tau don't have a lot of vehicles, and despite having engineering experience, I had to figure out how a manta ray would work. That is not my area of expertise. I'm like, right, spaceships.
Okay, so the first vehicle we're going to be looking at today is the Piranha Skimmer. Now the Piranha Skimmer has a few variants. It's primarily a reconnaissance vehicle, but it can also be used as a fire support role. The most common armament for Piranhas are chin-mounted burst cannons and 2 detachable gun drones, which is very similar to the Devilfish troop carrier. However, the Piranhas also armed with a pair of Seeker missiles in order to provide heavy fire support, and it also comes in the TX-42 variant, which has a reworked crew compartment and upgraded armament to turn it into a much heavier gunship. Now it has 2 crew, 2 pilots, well, a pilot and a co-pilot, a weight of about 4.5 tons, and a max top speed of 160 kilometers an hour. That's one.
Yeah. So I'm gonna edit at a certain point and then go from there. So. The Piranha, first off, I'm really glad that they're wearing helmets, because every picture I find shows them in the full Fire Warrior gear with the full face helm and everything, because 160 kph would actually cause windburn to the skin if you're moving that quickly and not actually, like, covering yourself up. To illustrate this in our terms, that's over 100 miles an hour in empirical measurement on a motorcycle. That really sucks. Trust me, I've done it before without having like jeans on, and my legs hated me for a couple days. The primary armament says that it's a burst cannon, but all the pictures I see actually show them wielding the fusion blaster, which is an anti-armor weapon. This makes me compare this more to a small tank destroyer than a scout, because, well, I would imagine it would work more like a Hellcat at that point, which was a American World War II vehicle whose sole job was to drive around and blow up enemy tanks. More importantly, I would also akin it to the immediate heavy fire support for the infantry instead of a reconnaissance vehicle, because it hovers and skims. Also, the 2 gun drones that attach to it, I'm wondering if those were factored in as something out the gate, or if they were an add-on later. If they were an add-on later, I imagine that there's something that has to compensate for their weight distribution. As far as armor and defense, speed is defense in this case. I imagine this thing has literally no armor whatsoever, and that you should rely on it to actually stop rounds from killing it. I mean, it's an open-top vehicle, so that also means that things like mortars and artillery shells are still a threat to the crew, and I just don't suspect it. I don't suspect it ever taking any hits at all. The variant, the TX, I have a picture of this, I swear. There it is. You're basically taking that anti-armor theory and going to the next level with it, because it's either going to be equipped with 2 light anti-armor weapons, i.e. plasma rifles, or 2 heavy anti-armor weapons, i.e. fusion blasters, and then you're putting an armor section over the crew compartment. Smart idea. Functional idea. Not quite sure how it works out in practice to still go 160 kph, because I'm thinking you basically just doubled the weight of the vehicle, and then you're expecting it to still go just as fast.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if 160 kph is for sure on the X42 variant, but I can say that the marker light replacement is a good idea, because anything that this light anti-tank weapon runs into that it can't take care of, it can go, hey, I need a missile right there. And that's a pretty good idea. A lot of our modern vehicles, for instance, I'll give you a couple examples. The Bradley, there's a variant of the British Fox armored fighting vehicle, the British Swingfire, there's even the Striker with its 105mm cannon variant also has tow missile launchers attached to it, because we find anti-tank missiles are pretty damn effective. So having the ability to call those in, probably a stroke of genius on the Tau's part, unless of course they were already thinking, we really need anti-armor weapons because we don't give them to our infantry, and so all other vehicles basically have tow missile launcher attachments. There's even a proposed, and if you look at for instance the T-90 Russian tank or the Leopard 2 A6, they fire anti-tank missiles out of their main gun as well. Wondering if the Tau might adopt that one day.
It's possible. It's certainly possible. Okay, so moving on to the next vehicle, it's the Tau Tetra. Now the Tetra is a very light anti-grav reconnaissance vehicle, operated by a two-man Pathfinder team. It's not really designed for actual combat, it's more for long-range patrol and infiltration. Now, this thing weighs about 1.8 tons and has a max recorded speed of 350 kilometers an hour. And has a main armament of twin-link pulse rifles and no secondary armament. But it can be upgraded with things such as a Black Sun filter, a decoy launcher, or a targeting array and targeting lock systems.
So this is a stripped-down version of the Piranha. They basically took the wings off, took the gun drones off. I'm not quite sure what they used for stabilization at that point. They did still provide it with the X-42's crew compartment armor, which is just a strip of armor over the crew so that if they have the vehicle pointed at the enemy, then obviously the crew is not completely exposed to everything. However, I also imagine this was done because I see a lot of the Tau Pathfinder models who have the rail rifles who aren't wearing helmets. So you kind of need something as a windshield if you're not going to wear a helmet. Then the actual shaping of it is ideal for it's not ideal for the vehicle itself. I'm just going to get that out of the way right now. This is not a very good slope or anything for the defense of the vehicle. The shape of the hull and all the armor is apparently there for the defense of the crew. Basically, I'm guessing the idea is that the Tau Pathfinder team I would equate to being like Rangers or SAS troopers. And you want them alive because you put a lot of extra training into those guys. So you're taking the time to make sure that their vehicle, while their vehicle could be destroyed, they can get out and just keep going. More importantly here, I'm also imagining that this is like every other Tau vehicle that I've read about, and they can just attach the seeker missiles to it, and it comes with a marker light system already on it. So if they absolutely have to have it, they have an anti-vehicle weapon. Otherwise, for the most part, it appears as though that they basically have defensive secondary equipment they can upgrade it with. But other than that, it's purely, we have a recon team, we need a little bit of extra fire support, here you go. Okay. The biggest issue I have, however, with this is that it says it does 350 kph. Now I'm gonna have to double check that real quick, but that's 217 miles per hour. We don't have race cars that go that fast on a regular basis, much less armored vehicles. If you're doing 350 kph, I'm beginning to get concerned about how well you're able to control that. This is kind of reminds me of the scene from Star Wars Return of the Jedi where the stormtrooper forgets where he's going, looks back, and then looks forward and runs headlong into a tree.
Splat.
There's no distracted driving with this. Ever. I'm guessing that's why you have two people in it. One person is doing the actual recon, the other person's sole job, drive.
In fairness to the Tau, though, we don't really know that much about their physiology, so they might just have much higher reflexes compared to what a human has. Which obviously would be an advantage, at driving at such high speed.
That would be an advantage. We also know that their armor apparently has integration systems for their vehicles, such as their crisis suits. So maybe they're directly integrated into the computer, and therefore you're bypassing the manual need to move muscles. This is actually a technology that we're kind of working on right now. You can actually get a couple. They're experimental implants. They don't really do much, but they can monitor heart rate, health conditions. You can plug it into a computer and give some very basic functionality out of it, but not really on the level that we'd be talking with the Warhammer 40k, where, he just sits down and plugs directly into his brain, and then he's controlling it with his brain rather than his muscles. That would reduce reaction time by about 1/10 of a second, which doesn't seem like much. But you have to remember, perfect human reaction time is 3/10 of a second, so they would be cutting their reaction time somewhere between a sixth to a third.
Yeah.
It also might have, it might actually have some sort of dampening system so that they could stop on a dime without the crew proceeding to faceplant into, whatever's in the front of the vehicle, or badly bruise themselves on seatbelts. I hope they have seatbelts. It would seem like a very bad design flaw for them not to have a seatbelt or something holding them in place, because if you're doing 350 kph and you make a sudden hard right-hand turn, you're going to sling somebody out of the vehicle if they're not buckled in with no actual side on the crew compartment or anything.
Maybe they can use that as a basis for another weapon. They just launch Kroot out the side. It's like, okay, handbrake turning with launching Kroot.
That would be hilarious. Just attach a trailer to the back, absolutely go total redneck with it. 14, 15 Kroot back there, just sling them and say, alright, get them, boys.
To cue the Dukes of Hazzard, he's like, dun 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 dun. He's like, well, looks like them Kroot boys are going to go get some air. So that was the worst Dukes of Hazzard impression you'll ever hear.
That is the worst Dukes of Hazzard impression ever. Finnish people should not do Dukes of Hazzard impressions. I'm not being racist, I'm just being honest. Let's move on to, speaking of 14 people, the Devilfish carries about that many, right?
Yes, that's right. Now, the Devilfish is the primary armoured personnel carrier of the Tau. It's the equivalent of a Space Marine Rhino, as the chassis also forms the basis for other vehicles such as the Hammerhead and the Skyray missile destroyer. Now, it has a primary armament of a burst cannon mounted on a chin turret, which is aimed and fired by the Devilfish's pilot. It can also have a secondary armament of a pair of gun drones, although these may be replaced with a smart missile system. Now, while its armor is sufficient against most small arms fire, it's actually very vulnerable against Imperial anti-tank weaponry such as crack missiles, especially against the top armor where it's actually thinner. It has a weight of 14 tons and a max speed of 75 kilometers an hour, as much as a looted Orc Baneblade with a supercharged engine.
So, let's talk about protection first, because this thing is expected to be an armored personnel carrier. You would expect it to actually protect the crew, and therefore the people inside. It does and it doesn't. The cone at the front of the shaped cone looks exactly like the shape on the Tetra and the Piranha. I'm guessing that the Tetra and Piranha got it from the Devilfish. That's actually a very good angled point of armor. So are the areas beside that. But then it does this really weird thing where it flattens everything out and creates this big broad target. So you effectively have a narrowed center that, if directly facing an enemy, like literally you are facing them, you are maximizing the armor of that center. But then right beside it, where the crew get in, especially just past that is where the two side doors are for passengers to get in and out is starting to flatten out and become an easier penetration point. More importantly, because of its design, if you're not facing directly at something, you're actually hurting your armor, which is a huge problem. And I don't see any way of I personally actually played the Tau in 40k on the tabletop, but I always looked at their vehicles and went, this thing could be penetrated so easily because of how poorly its armor is actually sloped.
But isn't their shape more designed for an aerodynamic standpoint? Because pretty much all Tau vehicles are skimmers.
Which is why I'm leaning towards the theory that to the Tau, speed is armor on all of their vehicles, especially since their Devilfish forms the basis for their entire armor contingent. Speed is armor. Armor is not armor. I would imagine that they put enough armor on all of their vehicles to basically stop small arms fire and light explosives, but when you fire a dedicated anti-tank weapon at it, such as mentioned here, the crack missile, screw it. If it gets hit, it's dead. Which is also why I'm thinking that's why they use the decoy launchers and the disruption system to create a holographic image and fire off decoys for the missiles to go after. Speed is their armor. Avoidance is their armor. So, unlike the British onion system, where it's if you encounter the enemy, don't get seen. If you get seen, don't get shot at. If you get shot at, don't get hit. The British go a step further past that point. If you get hit, don't get penetrated. If you get penetrated, don't get killed. Well, those last two things, the Tau don't incorporate. They much rather prefer not to get hit in the first place. And so I would imagine they're using these things as pure mobility. Pilots being trained that you don't stop moving until it's time to deploy, and then as soon as you're deployed, you immediately floor it and keep moving until it's time to pick up again. Which could work. I'm imagining that the hover system or the skimmer system, the gravity, anti-gravity, whatever you want to call it, works very well. I mean, it does 75 kph. To compare this with a modern vehicle, the fastest main battle tank, or the fastest armored personnel carrier that can actually transport a full squad of troops, goes to the Russian BMPs. Or no, the BMDs, excuse me. Not the BMP, the BMDs. Which will do 80 kph. This thing is keeping up with a BMD and weighing almost twice its actual weight. The one issue I have here, though, is that it only has one crew person, and he's right in the front, and you can even see on the Tau vehicles where he's located, the pilot. If an anti-armor round hits that pilot's slit, which I'm wondering why they have a pilot slit if they can integrate directly into the armor, why you would actually bother with the actual manual vision port here on the front of the Devilfish, when you can just have a camera.
Could it be as a failsafe, just in case that camera does indeed fail, and they can still use his eyes to actually see where he's going?
That's true. But since you only have a pilot and you don't have a commander, it makes more sense to strictly rely on the cameras in this case, because you need multiple cameras to see around the vehicle. And that little vision slit is basically, you can see immediately what's in front of you. You can't actually see what's beside you or what's behind you. That's one of the purposes why all of our vehicles, even if they only require a driver in most cases, if it's considered an armored vehicle, you will have a commander. Because you need somebody who can actually look around and see what's going on around them and help direct the driver. So even even though in theory the Vixen version of the Fox armored car could operate with just a driver, they still would. The prototype still required a commander for the practicality of the driver can only see what's in front of him. We need to know what's beside him and what's behind him. So I'm not quite sure how they get over that. Then again, I may be wrong in that, and they may have a bunch of cameras, and he may be looking at a bunch of different screens, and those vision ports are actually the camera ports. I do also like the fact that this thing can equip the Seeker missile and the smart missile system, basically upgrading its firepower to what I would equate to an M2 Bradley, where you have the light anti-armor, anti-infantry machine gun, and then you have, I can fire missiles. But then there's the other variants, like the Hammerhead, which is, I think this should be you, actually.
Yes. Now, the Hammerhead is the main battle tank of the Tau. As stated before, it's used as the Devilfish chassis. So, in essence, it's a Tau version of a Space Marine Predator. Now, it can be fitted with a variety of weapons, though the most common choices tend to be either the rail guns or the ion cannons. It can also have 2 independently aimed burst cannons as secondary armament, along with a smart missile system or a pair of gun drones. Now, the armor, what we do know, it's strong and corrosive resistant, but it's also surprisingly lightweight as well, made from some nano crystalline alloy, but of an unknown composition. Now, it's got 3 crew, a pilot, a co-pilot, and a commander, weighs in at 24 tons, with a top speed of 70 miles an hour. Now, it's only 70 kilometers an hour, sorry, which is only 5 kilometers slower than the standard Devilfish.
So, first off, I'm going to point out that 5 kilometers an hour slower, 10 tons heavier. That's interesting, because you almost doubled the weight, but you only lost 5 kph. So whatever system they're using to propel this thing is massively powerful. Next, the fact that it's still on the Devilfish chassis, but you took it from being able to carry 12 to 14 people to being able to carry just 2 other people besides the pilot. That's a lot of other systems that had to go in here to mount that turret. And to obviously upgrade the engine to get it going faster. That is a lot of extra internal systems. It makes me wonder if the railgun on this thing is as delicate as the railguns on our destroyers, because the U.S. Navy has implemented, for those who don't know, railguns on our destroyers. They're very high caliber, but they're also very delicate, and we know it. If you have like an explosion on the ship is probably gonna knock it out instantly. So I'm really wondering if they have a similar issue where the magnetic drives for their railguns are easily knocked out or not. Especially with the small turret. Now, the document we have says that it has 10 degrees of gun depression and 28 degrees of elevation. I hate to do this to you, Games Workshop, but I'm going to have to call bullshit. And there's a reason. We have tried these oscillating turrets in real life. On the French AMX-13, on the French AMX-50B, on several prototypes, the T-69 and the T-71 being variants for the US prototypes. I think even the British had a prototype, and I don't remember what it was. But because of the way the turret is designed, when you tilt it back, the back end of the gun actually runs into the hull. So it may have 10 degrees of depression and 28 degrees of elevation. But that's probably only off the front of the vehicle. As soon as you try to turn it to the side or the rear, it's gonna run into the vehicle itself and be unable to tilt any further. Or, because of the way the oscillating turret works, when you don't have it facing forward, the systems in the turret are actually moving, and therefore the systems in the turret are now interfering with the elevation and depression angles you can achieve, because they've now had to stretch and move, and you've lost elevation and depression simply because you're moving the parts around that are actually inside. More importantly, oscillating turrets cannot really bear much armor. Which means that, to me, the turret mounted on this thing is the weak point. The point with the big flashy gun that everyone's going to shoot at is also a giant weak point. Especially since it looks like the gun is literally attached via a small docking clamp instead of actually hardwired in. So I suspect that they really want you to shoot at the hull. They really want you to shoot at the hull. I also suspect that unlike that, even though it has the shape of the Devilfish, with the removal of the need for the crew, some of that extra weight is likely extra armor. You want this to be your main battle tank, and even if you're relying on speed as your defense, you will have to remember that it's gonna get hit. Like there's nothing you can do about it. It's eventually going to get hit. And as we can see here, the document we have says it can be penetrated by battle cannons, las cannons, and crack missiles. I'm guessing this armor is not very good.
No.
Again, I'm guessing even if they did add some extra armor, it's strictly for we're here to block small arms fire, we're here to block light anti-tank weapons or light anti-vehicle weapons, but as soon as you go to an anti-tank level weapon, we better dodge it or die.
That would tend to be the ETAL's modus operandi when it comes to warfare.
True. Their motto is speed kills.
Keep out of the way and keep shooting.
But I just don't see it. You slowed down the Hammerhead a little bit. It's now moving at roughly the same maximum speed as a T-90, which is currently the fastest main battle tank. But it's been seen with the war in the Ukraine that T-90s regularly get hit even when moving at top speed because it's a big target. And this is a big target. 4.1 meters tall, plus the distance it has to hover off the ground for ground clearance means you're talking 7 to 8 meters in the air. So that is the biggest disadvantage, by the way, I see with their vehicles, is because they're hovering. Forget about not being seen. You're gonna get seen. Because unlike with armored vehicles where you can add on what's called an armored ghillie suit, which is basically add on a bunch of natural foliage, park it in the densest brush you can possibly find, really decreases the likelihood somebody's going to notice it until they get really close. This thing, you're going to see it coming from a long way away.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And it's almost as wide as it is long. Plus, its main propulsion is completely exposed. Its main engines are right there.
So it's got two glaring weak points, the turret and the engine.
You can actually see the engine intakes, and if you put... I would imagine if you put some high caliber small arms fire, like a 50 cal sniper rifle, or a heavy bolter into one of those engines, you might actually disrupt the engine and hurt it significantly. And those aren't slow-moving rounds. Those are still high-velocity anti-infantry rounds. However, all this said, it does have one distinct advantage. And we know this for a fact. There is no modern tank that can withstand a railgun. Period. Even the Challenger 2, when faced down with a military railgun that we currently have, through the front, out the back, literally, with a hole twice the size of the round that entered it due to the kinetic forces involved. And a Challenger 2 is considered the best, heaviest armored main battle tank in existence. The Leopard 2 is right there with it, and it's debatable which one would actually withstand more firepower, but both of them, railgun will go through the front and out the back, no issue. So, firepower, it's got. Now my research on the ion cannon indicates that it's not as powerful as the railgun, but it's much more rapid firing. So I would equate the ion cannon more to how should I put this?
Anti-light vehicle and anti-infantry?
Kind of more anti-light vehicle. The railgun is a super powerful, I'm going to punch your armor and kill it, but if you're going to shoot it at a rhino, it would seem kind of pointless because I don't think it would actually do much other than kill the people who are in the immediate way of the round. Whereas the ion cannon, I feel more is the I'm going to kill rhinos and I'm going to go blow up Imperial Guard chimeras type of deal. So I could see like a platoon of 3 hammerheads, one of them is always going to have an ion cannon, and then you're going to have 2 with this massive kill all the armor type of deal. And as with all the other Tau vehicles we've seen, all of them are really focused into one role, and the hammerhead is definitely, I brought a tank to kill your tank. So that's its sole job. And even with the option for the missiles or the plasma rifles or the burst cannons, it's still, I brought a tank